He stood in the rain, a silhouette against the weeping gray sky, the water plastering his black coat to his frame. The city lights of Seoul blurred into a watercolor painting of Mion and sorrow behind him. She saw him from her window, a statue of impossible stillness in the heart of the storm. He had not moved for an hour. "I burned it all down for you, Hana." His voice, when it finally came, was a raw tear in the fabric of the night, carried not by the wind, but by the small, crackling speaker of her apartment's intercom. She had refused to let him up. The companies, the contracts, the name, it is all ash. There is nothing left of that world. Her hand trembled where it rested on the talk button. She could feel the phantom weight of his gaze even through the concrete and steel separating them. "Now," he finished, his voice breaking with the sheer, ragged weight of his sacrifice. "You have to choose." 3 months earlier, the only choice Hana So had to make was between paying the rent or her mother's medical bill. The answer, as always, was both, which meant another month of instant noodles and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that sleep could not fix. She stood in the gilded ballroom of the Sheila Hotel, a ghost at a feast. Her dress was a simple navy sheath bought on sale 3 years ago. It was the nicest thing she owned, and in this sea of bespoke silk and glittering diamonds, it felt like sackcloth. She came alone. Coming to her ex-boyfriend's wedding was an act of quiet, personal madness. Chaewon had not just left her, he had traded her in. He had traded 5 years of shared struggles, whispered dreams in their tiny, cramped apartment, and her unwavering belief in him for a merger. He was marrying the daughter of a tech conglomerate, a woman whose smile was as polished and vacant as the marble floors. Hana had told herself she needed to see it, to witness the final closing of that chapter so it could never haunt her again. A foolish, romantic notion. The reality was just humiliating. She held a glass of champagne she had no intention of drinking, the bubbles rising and dying like her own short-lived hopes. Every glance she received was laced with a fine, sharp pity. There she is, the one he left behind. She could almost hear the whispers over the string quartet's polite rendition of a pop song. From across the hall, Kwon Ji-hoon watched her. He stood near a shadowed pillar, a void of stillness in the swirling, self-congratulatory chaos. He was supposed to be here. The bride's father owed his organization, the Golden Dragon Syndicate, a significant sum. This marriage was, in part, a settlement, a daughter for a debt. It was a tale as old as power, and it bored him to his very soul. These people, with their loud laughter and empty eyes, were insects. He was a collector of debts, a purveyor of shadows, and this glittering party was just another corner of his vast, dark kingdom. Then he saw her. She was not the most beautiful woman in the room, not by the shallow metrics of this crowd. But she was the only real one. There was a defiance in the straight line of her back, a universe of untold stories in the melancholic curve of her mouth. While everyone else performed, she simply existed, and in her existence there was a strength that called to something deep within him, a part of himself he thought had died long ago. The world, for Kwon Ji-hoon, did not slow down. It stopped. The clinking glasses, the music, the drone of meaningless conversation, it all faded into a distant hum. There was only the woman in the simple navy dress, holding her champagne like a shield. A sudden, violent possessiveness seized him. A feeling so alien and powerful, it was like a physical blow. Mine. The word bloomed in his mind, dark and absolute. He did not understand it. He did not question it. He simply knew it to be true. He pushed off the pillar, his movement a study in predatory grace. Men in tailored suits stepped aside without realizing why. Women's conversations faltered as he passed, their eyes drawn to the stark, dangerous beauty of his face, the faint, white scar that cut a line along his chiseled jaw. He ignored them all. His focus was singular. Hana felt the shift in the room's atmosphere before she saw him. It was as if the temperature had dropped, the air growing heavy and electric. Then he was there, standing beside her, not looking at her but out at the crowd, as if they were sharing a secret observation. He was impossibly tall, dressed in a suit so black it seemed to drink the light. "A celebration of a successful transaction," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that vibrated through her. It was not a question. Hana's guard, already at its peak, went into overdrive. She had no idea who this man was, but he radiated a kind of power that was fundamentally different from the corporate arrogance filling the hall. This was older, sharper. "I suppose all weddings are a kind of transaction," she replied, her own voice cooler than she felt. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He turned his head, and his gaze finally met hers. His eyes were dark, so dark they seemed bottomless, and they looked at her with an unnerving intensity, as if he were seeing not just her dress or her face, but the very architecture of her soul. It was a look that stripped her bare. "Not all," he said softly. "Some are just a mistake." Before she could formulate a response, a brittle, cheerful voice cut through their charged silence. "Hana, I can't believe you actually came." It was Chaewon, his arm looped possessively through his new bride's. He had the same handsome face, but it was coated now with a thick veneer of smug satisfaction. His wife, Sora, looked Hana up and down, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "Chaewon," Hana said, her voice tight. "Sora, congratulations." "Thank you. We were so surprised to see your RSVP. It was very big of you to come," Chaewon said, the words dripping with condescension. "I hope you're doing well. Things must be tough." The insult, wrapped in a blanket of fake concern, landed like a slap. Hana's knuckles went white around her glass. She was about to deliver a retort sharp enough to draw blood when the man beside her spoke. "She is doing exceptionally well," Ji-hoon stated, his voice calm but laced with a sudden, chilling authority. He took a small step forward, subtly positioning himself between Hana and the couple. He looked at Chaewon, his dark eyes flat and empty. In fact, some might say she traded up. Chaewon blinked, confused and intimidated. He looked from the stranger's lethally expensive suit to his own, and for the first time that night, he seemed to shrink. "I'm sorry, and you are?" Ji-hoon's smile did not reach his eyes. "A friend," he said, the word hanging in the air with the weight of a threat. He let his gaze drift to the bride's father, who was watching them from across the room, a sheen of sweat on his brow. Ji-hoon gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The man flinched. An investor in new beginnings. The veiled meaning was lost on Hana, but not on Chaewon, who caught the terrified look on his new father-in-law's face. The groom's bravado evaporated instantly. He mumbled a hasty excuse and pulled his bride away, casting a nervous glance over his shoulder. The space they left behind was filled with a humming silence. "Thank you," Hana said, her voice barely a whisper. She felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the entire night, by this man's sudden, dramatic intervention. "I should go." She turned to leave, her only thought to escape the gilded cage of the ballroom and breathe the cool night air. "Hana." He said her name as if he had known it his entire life. She stopped, her back to him. He stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His voice was a murmur against her ear, intimate and absolute. "He made the wrong choice," Ji-hoon whispered, the words a solemn vow. "Choose me." Shock, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She spun around, her eyes wide with disbelief and a spark of anger. Who was this man? What gave him the right? His face was unreadable, his dark eyes holding hers with that same terrifying intensity. "I don't know who you are," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "But you are arrogant beyond belief." She turned and walked away, not looking back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't see the look on his face as he watched her go. Not of anger or rejection, but of profound, unshakable certainty. Kwon Ji-hoon had just found his reason. Now, he just had to claim her. The next day, Hannah was behind the counter of The Daily Grind, a small, independent coffee shop where she worked the morning shift. The smell of roasted beans and steamed milk was her sanctuary. It was a world away from the suffocating opulence of the wedding. Here, she was competent. She was needed. She was anonymous. Or so she thought. The bell above the door chimed, and in walked the man from the wedding. In the harsh light of day, he was even more striking and more out of place. He wore a simple gray Henley that stretched across a powerfully built chest and dark trousers. The casual clothes did nothing to soften his intensity. They only seemed to amplify it. The other patrons, mostly students and office workers, seemed to fade into the background. Hannah's heart leaped into her throat. She gripped the edge of the counter. He walked directly to her, ignoring the small queue. "Americano," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Black." She stared at him for a beat too long before her training kicked in. "There's a line," she said, her voice tight. He glanced at the two people behind him, then back at her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick stack of 50,000 won notes, placing it on the counter. "I'm buying the cafe for the next hour," he announced, not to her, but to the room at large. "Everything is on me. Please, finish your drinks and take your time." The owner, Mr. Kim, rushed out from the back, his eyes wide. He looked at the money, then at Ji-hoon, then back at the money. He started bowing. The other customers murmured in confusion and excitement. Hannah was mortified. "You can't do that." "I just did," Ji-hoon said calmly. "One Americano, please." Fuming, her hands shaking with anger, Hannah made his coffee. She slammed it onto the counter. "That will be 4,000 won." He pushed the stack of cash toward her. "Keep the change." "This is insane," she hissed, keeping her voice low as the last of the bewildered customers shuffled out. "This is creepy." "Is it?" He took a sip of the coffee, his gaze burning into her. "I wanted to talk to you, uninterrupted." "You could have waited in line like a normal person." "I am not a normal person, Hannah," he said, the statement simple, factual. "And I am not a patient one." He gestured to the empty chair across the small table in the corner. 5 minutes. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to throw the rest of his coffee in his arrogant, handsome face. But his sheer force of will was a physical presence, pinning her in place. And a darker, more honest part of her was curious. Terrified, but curious. Wiping her hands on her apron, she walked around the counter and sat down, her posture rigid. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone clipped. "I told you," he said, leaning forward slightly. "I want you to choose me." She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "That's not a pickup line. That's a symptom of a personality disorder. I don't know you. You don't know me. You show up at my ex's wedding, act like some dark knight, and now you're here, flashing money around like a gangster in a bad movie. No thank you." His eyes glinted with something that looked like amusement. "I liked that you went to the wedding. It showed spirit. I liked that your dress was simple. It showed dignity. I liked that you were going to tell that boy exactly what you thought of him before I interrupted. It showed fire." He leaned back. "I know enough." "You know nothing," she shot back. "You see some sad woman at a wedding and decide she's your new project? My life is not a game for a rich man to play." "This is not a game," he said, and all traces of amusement vanished, replaced by that chilling intensity. "And I am not just a rich man." That night, she recounted the story to her roommate, Bora, while they ate cheap takeout noodles. Bora's eyes were wide with excitement. "Hana, this is literally the plot of every drama ever," she squealed. "A chaebol heir, handsome, mysterious, and obsessed with you? You have to give him a chance." "He's not a chaebol, Bora. He's a stalker," Hana grumbled, poking at her noodles. "He found out where I work. How did he do that? Is that legal?" "Who cares about legal? It's romantic! He's pursuing you!" "He's terrifying." But even as she said it, she remembered the look in his eyes. Not cruel, but focused. Absolute. It was a feeling she had never inspired in anyone, least of all Chaewon, whose love had always been conditional. Ji-hoon's pursuit was relentless and unnervingly creative. He did not send flowers to her apartment. He had the entire drab hallway of her building filled with fragrant gardenias one morning, with a simple note: "So you can walk through a garden on your way to work." When she told him off for it, he had them removed within the hour, leaving only a lingering scent and an apology. He appeared outside the public library where she worked her second job in the evenings. He would just sit in his sleek black car across the street, watching. Not in a menacing way, but in a way that felt protective, like a guardian. It was deeply unsettling and strangely comforting all at once. One evening, she left the library after a grueling 10-hour shift, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her mother had called earlier, crying about another bill they couldn't pay. The exhaustion was a physical ache, a clamp around her chest. She stumbled on the curb, her vision blurring for a second. And then he was there. He didn't say a word. He simply took her elbow, his grip firm and steady, and guided her to a small, unassuming noodle shop nearby. He sat her down, ordered 2 bowls of hot kalguksu, and they ate in silence. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't talk about his wealth or his power. He just watched her eat, his expression unreadable. When she had finished the last of the warm, savory broth, feeling life seep back into her weary limbs, she looked up at him. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft. "You looked tired," he said simply. That small act of unadorned kindness did more to breach her defenses than all his grand gestures combined. In that moment, he wasn't a mysterious tycoon or a potential threat. He was just a man who saw that she was struggling and offered her a bowl of soup. After he walked her home, he stopped her at the door to her building. "Your family has debt," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Your father's. Gambling." Hana froze, shame and anger warring within her. "How do you know that?" "I know everything about you, Hana," he said, his voice gentle. "Let me pay it. It's nothing to me. Let me take that burden from you." The walls went up instantly, higher and thicker than ever before. "No," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "Absolutely not. You think you can just buy my life? Buy my gratitude? I am not for sale, Kwon Ji-hoon. My struggles are my own. I will handle them." She expected him to be angry or to argue. Instead, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It transformed his severe features, making him look younger, almost boyish. It was a smile like a punch to the chest. "I know," he said, his voice full of a strange, deep respect. "That is why it has to be you." He left her standing there, her anger confusingly melting into something else, something warm and treacherous. She was beginning to understand that his pursuit wasn't about possession in the way she'd thought. It was about recognition. He saw the fire in her, the pride she fought so hard to maintain, and he wasn't trying to extinguish it. He was drawn to its heat. They began to talk, really talk. They met for coffee, and this time he waited in line. They walked along the Han River at night, the city lights a glittering tapestry around them. He spoke of his life, not in specifics, but in feelings, the crushing weight of a legacy he never asked for, the profound, suffocating loneliness of being surrounded by people who wanted something from him. He called his family business the Golden Dragon, a name that sounded mythical and grand. "It is a cage," he told her one night, his eyes on the dark water. "A beautiful, gilded cage, and I have been in it since the day I was born." She, in turn, told him about her dreams. The dream of one day opening a small bookstore with a cafe inside, a quiet place filled with stories and the smell of old paper and coffee. A dream she had long since packed away as a childish fantasy. He listened. He truly listened. When she spoke, he watched her with an unwavering focus, as if her small, shelved dream was the most important thing in the world. She was falling for him. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It felt like stepping off a cliff and trusting the wind would catch her. He was possessive, yes, but also incredibly gentle with her. He was intense, but his intensity was focused on her well-being, her happiness. He made her feel seen, cherished, in a way she had never known. One evening, he took her to a private gallery he owned. It was filled with ancient Korean pottery, each piece simple, elegant, and priceless. "This is my favorite," he said, stopping before a plain white moon jar. "It is imperfect. The glaze is cracked. It is not symmetrical. But that is what makes it beautiful. It has survived." He turned to her, his hand coming up to gently trace the line of her cheek. "It reminds me of you." Her breath hitched. In that moment, with the weight of centuries of silent art around them, she leaned in and kissed him. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision. It was months of tension, of resistance and pursuit, of fear and fascination finally breaking. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her tight against him as if he was afraid she might disappear. His lips were firm, demanding, yet full of a desperate, aching tenderness. It was the kiss of a starving man finding his first meal. It was the kiss of a drowning man finding air. It was the beginning of the end. Their world became a bubble, a secret universe for two. Ji-hoon showed her a side of Seoul she never knew existed. Hidden restaurants, private gardens, the city viewed from the dizzying height of his penthouse apartment that overlooked the entire skyline. He showered her not with diamonds, but with experiences. He arranged for a private lesson with a master potter after she'd admired the moon jar. He filled a notebook with business plans for her dream bookstore cafe, complete with market analysis and potential locations. He was not just a lover, he was a partner in her dreams. For the first time, Hana allowed herself to feel safe. The constant, grinding worry about money began to recede. The exhaustion was replaced by a vibrant energy. She was in love, deeply, irrevocably in love, with a man who was slowly, carefully, letting her into the gilded cage he inhabited. But cages have bars for a reason, and the world outside their bubble had not gone away. The first sign of trouble was a phone call. Ji-hoon was with her in her small apartment, a place he seemed to prefer over his own sterile penthouse, when his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, and his entire demeanor shifted. The warmth in his eyes turned to ice. The relaxed line of his shoulders went rigid. "Father," he answered, his voice devoid of all emotion. Hana could only hear his side of the conversation, a series of clipped, respectful yet unyielding responses. "Yes, I am aware of the situation. No, it is under control. She is not a distraction. She is important. With all due respect, my personal life is not a matter for the board to discuss." He hung up, a muscle feathering in his jaw. The scar there seemed more prominent. "Is everything okay?" Hana asked softly. He turned to her, the mask of the leader falling away, replaced by a weary vulnerability that broke her heart. "My father does not approve of you." "Because I'm not from a wealthy family?" she guessed, a familiar ache settling in her chest. "Because you are not a transaction," he corrected her, his voice rough. "Because he sees you as a weakness, a liability." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "He is wrong. You are my only strength." But Chairman Kwan was not a man to be ignored. He was the architect of the Golden Dragon, the patriarch who had built an empire on shadows and fear. He saw Hana as an impurity, a crack in the perfect, cold facade of his son. A week later, Hana was walking home from the library. It was late, the street was quiet. A black sedan, a common sight in Seoul, suddenly accelerated, its engine roaring. It swerved directly toward her, its headlights blinding. She froze, a scream caught in her throat. At the last possible second, it swerved away, its tires screeching on the pavement, and sped off into the night. She was left trembling on the sidewalk, her heart a wild bird trapped in her ribs. It could have been an accident, a drunk driver, but she knew with a chilling certainty that it was not. When Ji-hoon arrived minutes later, his face was a mask of cold fury she had never seen before. He had been in his car down the street, his silent vigil now a horrifying necessity. He checked her over with frantic hands, his touch shaking. "Did they hurt you? Hana, look at me. Are you hurt?" "No, I'm okay," she whispered, though she was anything but. He held her, his body rigid with a terrifying rage. "This was a message," he bit out, his voice a low growl. "From a rival, using you to get to me." The bubble had burst. The real world, his world, had come crashing in, and it was violent and terrifying. The next day, a Brit came through the window of her apartment. Wrapped around it was a note. "Power has a price. Is she worth it?" That night, Ji-hoon took her to his penthouse. It felt different now, not like a palace of wonders, but a fortress. His lieutenant, a quiet, watchful man named Min-jun, stood guard outside the door. The lightness between them was gone, replaced by a heavy, suffocating fear. Ji-hoon stood by the vast window, the city lights reflecting in his haunted eyes. "I have to tell you everything," he said, his back to her. "Not the half-truths, not the poetry, the ugly, brutal truth." Hana wrapped her arms around herself, a cold dread creeping into her veins. "The Golden Dragon Syndicate is not a company," he began, his voice flat and dead. "Not in the way you understand. My grandfather started it after the war, a protection service for merchants. My father expanded it. It is an organization built on leverage, coercion, and fear. We own politicians, we control unions, we finance projects that no bank will touch. We break legs as often as we sign contracts. The money comes from places you cannot imagine, places soaked in darkness." He finally turned to face her. His expression was stripped of all pretense, leaving only a raw, agonizing self-loathing. "I am not an investor, Hana. I am a gangster, a kingpin. I am the head of the most powerful criminal organization in this country. This," he said, touching the scar on his jaw, "was a gift from a rival when I was 19. A reminder that in my world, love is a liability, and weakness is a death sentence." The words hit her one by one, each a physical blow. Gangster, criminal, violence. The beautiful gilded cage he spoke of was not a metaphor. It was a prison built of other people's pain. The man she loved, the man who had been so gentle with her, who listened to her dreams, was a creature of that darkness. Her mind couldn't reconcile the two images. "The car, the brick," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That was because of you." "Yes," he said, the word costing him everything. "Because loving me puts a target on your back. Because my enemies, and even my own family, see you as a weapon to be used against me." She sank onto the sofa, the strength leaving her legs. The entire foundation of her new life crumbled into dust. The safety she had felt with him was an illusion. It was the most dangerous place she could possibly be. It wasn't just about her. What if they went after her mother, or Bora? And beyond the fear, there was a deeper, more profound wound. Her principles. All her life, she had prided herself on her integrity. She worked 2 jobs to pay a debt that wasn't even hers because it was the right thing to do. She had refused his money because her dignity was not for sale. And now, she was in love with a man whose entire fortune was built on the very things she despised. "I can protect you," he said, taking a step toward her, his voice desperate. "I will build a fortress around you. Nothing will ever touch you again." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "And what about everyone else, Ji-hoon? The people your organization hurts? The lives that are broken to build this empire? Am I supposed to live in your fortress and pretend that world doesn't exist? To be the woman who just looks away?" The question hung between them, unanswerable. He had no reply. He had lived in that fortress his entire life, looking away. It was all he knew. "I can't," she sobbed, the words tearing from her throat. "I can't be that person. I love you. God, I love you so much it hurts. But I can't." The choice was clear. It was agonizing. It was the only one she could make and still live with herself. The goodbye was a quiet, desolate affair. It happened the next morning in the sterile perfection of his penthouse. The sun streamed in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, shattered piece of their future. "I'm going home," Hannah said. Her voice was hollow, her eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night spent wrestling with the impossible. Ji-hoon stood by the window, where he had stood all night. He looked as if he had aged a decade. The formidable power he usually radiated had collapsed inward, leaving behind a man who looked broken. He did not try to stop her. He did not make promises he could not keep. He knew she was right. That was the most torturous part of it all. Her goodness, the very thing he loved most about her, was the reason she had to leave. "My mother's house," she clarified. "In Busan. I can't stay in Seoul, not anymore." He nodded, a sharp, jerky movement. "I will have a car take you." "No," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "No more of your world touching mine. I'll take the train." He finally turned to face her, and the raw pain in his eyes was a physical thing. It reached across the room and squeezed the air from her lungs. "This is my fault. I brought the darkness to your door." "I chose to open it," she whispered, tears welling up again. "I don't regret loving you, Ji-hoon. I only regret that I can't." She walked to the door, each step an act of sheer will. Her hand was on the handle when his voice, ragged and torn, stopped her. "Hannah," she paused, her back to him, unable to bear seeing his face one last time. "Will you be safe?" he asked, the question small, elemental. "Safer than I am with you," she replied, the truth a clean, sharp blade. "But I will never be happy." She opened the door and walked out, leaving him alone in his fortress of glass and sky, a king once more in a kingdom of shadows, now utterly and completely empty. The misery of separation was a slow poison. For Hannah, returning to her mother's small, cluttered house in Busan was like stepping back in time. The familiar smell of kimchi and her mother's disapproval filled the air. Her mother, relieved to have her daughter away from the dangerous gangster, was nonetheless sharp-tongued about Hannah's heartbreak. "I told you, men like that are trouble. Good girls from good families don't get involved with their kind." Hannah got a job at a local library. Her days fell into a numbing routine. She woke up, she worked, she came home, she listened to her mother's complaints, she went to sleep. She was safe. The constant, low-grade fear that had become her companion in soul was gone. But in its place was a vast, echoing emptiness. The safety she had craved felt like a gray, featureless prison. The world, which had been so vibrant and full of terrifying, beautiful color with Ji-hoon, was now muted. She would find herself staring out the library window, her heart aching with a phantom pain. She missed his intensity. She missed the surprising gentleness in his hands. She missed the way he listened to her, the way his dark eyes would soften when she spoke of her silly little dream of a bookstore. She missed the man, not the monster. But the two were inseparable, and that was the tragedy she had to live with every day. Bora called her every night. "Are you okay?" she'd ask. "I'm fine," Hana would lie, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Kwon Ji-hoon descended into a private hell. He threw himself into the work of the Golden Dragon with a cold, terrifying fury. He was no longer just a leader. He was a wraith, a specter of vengeance and control. He crushed the rival faction that had threatened Hana with a brutality that shocked even his most hardened men. He consolidated his power, his every move precise, strategic, and utterly without mercy. The Golden Dragon had never been more powerful or more feared. But the victory was hollow. The power was meaningless. He would sit in his penthouse, the city lights spread before him like a carpet of fallen stars, and feel nothing but a profound, aching void. Hana's absence was a physical presence, a ghost that haunted every room. He saw her in the curve of the moon jar, heard her laugh in the silence. His lieutenant, Min Jun, watched with growing concern. The boss had always been intense, but there had been a flicker of something human beneath the surface. Now, that flicker was gone. He was a machine of pure, destructive will. "Chairman," Min Jun said one night, using the formal title, "the operation in Incheon was a success. We have full control of the port." Ji-hoon stared out the window, his expression blank. "Good. Is there anything else?" Min Jun pressed, probing for any sign of the man he once knew. "Leave me," Ji-hoon said, his voice flat. Late at night, he would do the one thing that brought him any semblance of feeling, a sharp, cutting pain. He would have his driver take him to Hana's old neighborhood. He would park down the street from her empty apartment building, the one with the hallway he had once filled with gardenias. He would sit there for hours in the dark, a lonely vigil for a life he had lost, just to be near a place she had once been. He would drive past the coffee shop, now just a building. He would pass the library, a monument to her quiet strength. He was the king of a vast, dark empire, and he had never been more powerless. He had everything a man could want, and he had nothing at all. One night, sitting in his car across from her old apartment, he finally reached his breaking point. He looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror, the cold eyes, the scar, the face of a monster. He thought of Hana, of her fierce integrity, of her quiet dream. He thought of her last words, "I will never be happy." He had let her go to keep her safe, to honor her principles. But what was the point of her safety if she was miserable? What was the point of his power if it cost him the only thing that made him feel alive? He looked at his empire of fear and money, an inheritance built on generations of darkness, and he saw it for what it was, a cage, a tomb. And he realized, with a sudden, blinding clarity, that he did not have to live inside it. He could burn it to the ground. The decision, once made, was absolute. The next morning, Kwon Ji-hoon walked into a meeting of the Golden Dragon's top lieutenants and his father, Chairman Kwon, and declared war on his own legacy. "We are going legitimate," he announced, his voice ringing with an authority that allowed no argument. "Effective immediately, all special financing operations will cease. All coercion tactics will end. We are liquidating assets tied to gambling, extortion, and any other enterprise that operates in the shadows. We will become a global logistics and investment firm. Nothing more." The room erupted. Men who had built their lives on fear and violence shouted in protest. His father, a man of iron will and cold fury, stood up, his face purple with rage. "Have you lost your mind?" Chairman Kwon roared. "You would destroy what your grandfather and I spent our lives building. For what? For a girl from the gutter?" "I am not destroying it," Ji-hoon replied, his voice calm and lethal. "I am cauterizing the wound. I am cutting out the rot. This family's name will no longer be a synonym for fear. This ends now, with me. You cannot do this, his father spat. The families, the politicians, they will turn on us. Our rivals will see it as weakness. They will tear us apart. Let them try, Ji-hoon said, his eyes like chips of obsidian. What followed was a brutal, systematic dismantling of a criminal empire from the inside. It was a corporate war fought in boardrooms and back alleys. Ji-hoon was ruthless. He used every piece of leverage, every secret he knew, to force his father's old guard into compliance or retirement. He sold off nightclubs, broke contracts with loan sharks, and fired anyone who resisted the new vision. He faced threats from within his own organization and from rivals who saw a chance to seize power. There were 2 attempts on his life, both of which he and the loyal Min-jun, who had chosen to stand with his boss, stoically thwarted. For 3 months, Ji-hoon worked relentlessly, fueled by a singular purpose. He tore down the gilded cage piece by piece, bar by bloody bar. He funneled the liquidated assets into legitimate ventures, weathering financial storms and betrayals. He was cleansing his soul with fire. He grew leaner. The shadows under his eyes deepened. But for the first time in his life, the man in the mirror was not a monster. He was just a man, tired and scarred, but fighting for his own redemption. Finally, one rainy evening, it was done. The Golden Dragon Syndicate was no more. In its place stood KJH Global, a smaller, leaner, but fully legitimate company. The last of the old guard was gone. His father had been forced into a bitter retirement, disowning him in the process. Ji-hoon was free. And so he went to her. He drove himself to Busan, the rain beating a solemn rhythm on the roof of his car. He stood outside her mother's house, not as a kingpin in a fortress, but as a man stripped bare, holding his heart in his hands. He pressed the intercom button. Hana saw him from her window, a silhouette in the storm. Her heart stopped. It had been 3 months, but it felt like a lifetime. She had told herself she was over him. She had lied. She heard the crackle of the intercom and then his voice, raw and broken, a sound that tore through her carefully constructed peace. I burned it all down for you, Hana. The companies, the contracts, the name. It is all ash. There is nothing left of that world. Her hand flew to her mouth. It couldn't be possible. The Golden Dragon was an institution, a force of nature. It couldn't just be gone. Now, he finished, his voice thick with the unshed tears of 3 months of battle and longing. You have to choose. Choose. The word echoed in the small, quiet room. The last time he had said it, it had been an arrogant demand. Now, it was a desperate plea. He hadn't just promised to change, he had changed. He had sacrificed his kingdom, his birthright, his entire world for her, for the principles she could not abandon. The choice was not a choice at all. It was an inevitability. It was gravity. She didn't bother with the intercom. She flew down the stairs, her heart hammering a wild, joyous rhythm against her ribs. She threw open the door, and there he was, soaked, tired, and more beautiful than she had ever seen him. The monster was gone. All that was left was the man, her man. She ran into the rain, into his arms. The reunion kiss was not a collision. It was a homecoming. It was the desperate, frantic joining of 2 halves of a soul that had been torn apart. His lips were cold from the rain, but they burned with a fire that reignited her world. His arms wrapped around her, holding her with a strength that was no longer about possession, but about not letting go, ever again. Tears mingled with the rain on their faces. Tears of sorrow for the time they had lost, and tears of boundless joy for the future they had just won. You came back, she sobbed against his mouth. I was never gone, he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. I was just finding my way home. To you. 1 year later. The air in the park was crisp with the scent of autumn. The afternoon sun cast long, gentle shadows across the grass. Children's laughter mingled with the rustling of golden ginkgo leaves. It was a scene of perfect, ordinary peace. Hana sat on a simple wooden bench, a book lying open in her lap, forgotten. She was watching Ji-hoon. He was not in a bespoke suit, but in a soft gray sweater and dark jeans. He was kneeling on the grass, his brow furrowed in concentration as a small, giggling girl taught him how to properly tie the ribbon on a kite. He looked up and caught Hana's eye, and a slow, easy smile spread across his face. It was a smile she saw every day now. A smile that reached his eyes and made them shine. KJH Global was thriving. It was smaller than the Golden Dragon had been, but it was built on solid ground, not on shadows. Ji-hoon worked hard, but he was home every night. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a quiet contentment she had never thought she would see in him. The scar along his jaw was still there, a pale white line against his skin. It was no longer a symbol of a dark past, but a reminder of the battle he had fought and won for them. Hana's bookstore, the Serendipity Shelf, was set to open in 2 weeks. It was a small, cozy space in a quiet neighborhood, with a little cafe in the corner that smelled of coffee and cinnamon. It was her dream, made real by his unwavering support and belief in her. He finally got the kite into the air, a splash of red against the brilliant blue sky. He handed the string to the little girl, who squealed with delight, then walked over to Hana, brushing the grass from his knees. He sat beside her on the bench, his shoulder pressing against hers. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just watched the kite soar. I used to think power was about control, he said softly, his eyes on the sky. About making the world bend to your will. He turned to her, his hand finding hers, their fingers lacing together. I was wrong. Power is this: a quiet afternoon, the freedom to choose who you want to be. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It wasn't a flashy, ostentatious thing. It was simple, elegant. He opened it. Inside was a ring, a single clear diamond on a plain platinum band. It wasn't a rock meant to impress the world. It was a star meant for her alone. Hana's breath caught in her throat. So Hana, he said, his voice steady, but his dark eyes were full of a profound, vulnerable love. You are my redemption. You are my peace. You are my home. He took a breath. Will you marry me? Tears of pure happiness welled in her eyes, blurring the perfect afternoon into a soft, beautiful watercolor. It wasn't a transaction. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice freely made by 2 people who had walked through darkness and found their way into the light, together. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Ji-hoon. Always, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss not of desperation or reunion, but of quiet, everlasting promise. A promise of a future filled not with power or riches, but with shared dreams, peaceful afternoons, and a love that had been strong enough to burn down a world and build a new one from the ashes. This story is a testament to the transformative power of love and the courage it takes to enact true change. It suggests that our pasts do not have to define our futures, and that true strength lies not in the power we hold over others, but in the vulnerability we are willing to show for the one we love. Redemption is not a gift, it is a choice, and sometimes it requires us to burn down the kingdom we inherited to build a home we deserve. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content, and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If you were moved by Hana and Ji-hoon's journey, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel for more dramatic stories, and share it with someone who believes in the power of a second chance. Now we have a question for you. When Ji-hoon first revealed the truth about his family, do you think Hana made the right decision to leave him? Was it an act of self-preservation or a necessary catalyst for his change? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And finally, what story should we tell next? Let us know by voting in the comments. A. The story of Minjun, the loyal lieutenant who must find his own purpose and identity after the Golden Dragon Syndicate is dismantled. B. The story of Bora, Hana's best friend, who finds herself falling for a charming and determined detective tasked with investigating the lingering shadows of the Syndicate's past.